food allergies. We're not quite sure what triggered it. It's itchy, rashy,
So far south, it's almost here.
This seems to be a lot in life as we age. Weird things are showing wrong with our bodies.
You know, and they're getting into this foodie things.
Tires start to leak and transmission doesn't work the way it used to.
It's quite as shiny as it was originally.
Well, only
How often is that? Something show up on that?
You know, it all started last year, I think around this time. I identified it initially as peanut allergy. And then they said, we think maybe it's all trees, but Chuck's not convinced of that. And then he had a big flare-up. This time around, not so sure what he was looking at. He's not there. He's holding out.
Give them my regards.
Okay. Been to Vietnam also to bed.
And we're back.
Hi, Phil. So I wanted to, can you hear? I wanted to seed our conversation this morning a little bit, though of course in our grand tradition you can and will derail the conversation.
Re-rail. Re-rail.
Re-rail. That's good. In all of our practices, there are levels of I know it's not exactly Buddhist to say this, but goals. Goals to be reached within a practice, even though the very nebulous goal of enlightenment is better not to pay too much attention to or work too hard on, but let things unfold. But along the way, we have a number of practices which might inspire us, and sometimes we get lost by virtue of not knowing what we're doing or why we're doing it or exactly how to do it in the most effective way. And it's important to address those things, lest we just get chronically bored with the entire path, which can be a real problem. So we can say things are not a real problem, it's all ephemeral and all of this, but the ephemeral sometimes wakes us up in the middle of the night and causes us to have all sorts of angst. And so one of our goals in the practice is this business of the aspiration bodhicitta, the wish to accomplish the Dharma, accomplish the promise of the Dharma, in order to have the skill to benefit all sentient beings. And the kind of auxiliary practices, primarily I'm thinking of the four immeasurables, which are immeasurable loving kindness and compassion, joy of a certain type, and equanimity. These things are easy for us to feel drawn to and to feel like we would like to accomplish them. But then we go off the cliff. So a number of questions arise, like how do you accomplish those things? And we do talk about them, and in classes and in retreats we talk about them, and we give methods. So a couple of thoughts on that this morning. Primarily, I'm focusing on the immeasurable equanimity, because it's important for us to see that without equanimity, nothing, the other three immeasurables will never flourish. I mean, immeasurable, if you think about it a moment, relies upon equanimity. Otherwise, it's not immeasurable. If I have immeasurable love for all sentient beings, except for this brand or this ethnic group or these people or these insects even, then it's not equanimity. It's short. And full equanimity is what actually powers the realization of relative bodhicitta. So, coming to the two things again, I'll probably get them done by noon. First of all, one thing that all of you have probably experienced even if you have trouble looking at it on a regular basis, is that when you sit down and meditate, you are distracted on a regular basis. If you look close, you will see, and we've brought this up a number of times, you will see that actually you did not decide the content of that distraction. Or any other distraction. And that should be, if it hasn't been, then you need to look closer. It should be a concern. Maybe even a troubling concern. How is it that I can be distracted while trying to do something that I feel is very precious, like the practice of the meditation? I'm distracted from the practice of that meditation. And how is it that I could be distracted by things that I actually have no interest in? And more importantly, by things that I didn't see coming, I don't know where they came from, and when they're gone, I don't know where they went. And the meditation is left sometimes like, it's just the skid mark that's left over. So there's a benefit to seeing this beyond the disappointment that we feel in not being able to remain like steady with the meditation. There is a huge benefit in seeing that we are not only not stable, at least for part of the time, but for most of us, most of the time, we are not only not stable, we are not stable in ways that we seem to have no say in. So we could ask the kind of juicy question of who decides what I think, what I feel, what I do, because sometimes it's looking like I have no idea what that is. there is another thing to look at, which we generally don't look at, and that is that it is not just me who is distracted, nor is it just the people in this room who are distracted. Because, of course, you would assume that people who were attempting to meditate would be less distracted than most other people. And maybe that's true. So let us assume for a moment that those who don't meditate are even more distracted in ways that they assume they are deciding. Right? Like you could decide to meditate and then decide to go to lunch. But since you decided to go to lunch, we don't normally call that a distraction. We call a distraction something that you do, you didn't think to do it, but you just found yourself doing it somehow. So if you look at all sentient beings and think that in this particular way, if I talk to my Dharma brothers and sisters about this, I discover that we are all kind of in this place of we're distracted and we don't know where it came from. And we decide not to be distracted, that quickly morphs into a distraction. It's like we're just plagued by it. So let us take it a step in the direction of not plagued by it, but about to have an important insight. That it's not just us, it's everybody. And the things that we think and do and say become the kind of the machinery of interdependence. So what I say today will affect how I feel this afternoon. What I eat for lunch today will affect how I feel tonight. Just that classic sense of interdependence is there. But when we're not deciding what our distractions are and what we're thinking and feeling, then we are still in the loop of interconnectedness. We're just not aware of it. And we're probably, as a group, serious practitioners, lay practitioners, but nonetheless serious practitioners, we're probably less distracted and less unaware, like more aware of these things than almost any other group. So what does that say about the other groups? And what does it say about our opinions about the other groups? Our ideas about them? Most of the ideas that we have about others we could easily put in the list of judgments. There's one, check, check, check. So that's what we do. But why are we judging them? Why are we judging somebody else who isn't even engaged in seeing what we see all the time and don't seem to be able to overcome it? So if you look at this just in a certain way, you can see this could be the seed for loving kindness, compassion. Kind of we could ask the question, what is the joy? What is its role? And certainly equanimity. Is there anyone, no matter how bad they are or how good they are, that we might say on the good side, from the standpoint of the practice of the Dharma, we'd have to exclude some, but mostly we would say everyone's in this place. So there's no really solid argument to be made for caring more for some as opposed to others. This was my first thought. Thinking about this, then we find it easier to imagine caring about all sentient beings. Everyone's kind of evolving in different directions and all, but even those who are completely asleep in that work are not actually much more asleep than I am. So no cause for judgment, only cause for general, all-embracing loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So one more thing, which is an enhancement to this. And that other thing is, we often talk about the unbounded view, right? The unbounded view is, we call it a view here to distinguish it from a belief. So we call it a view because we can hold any view we want, even without evidence. You know, if it's useful, then it could be a good view to hold. If it's useful, since we're not actually concerned about some absolute truth about it, just its usefulness is important. I mean, we use things to pick food up and eat them, and we wear warm clothes on cold days. We don't believe in sweaters and jackets. We use them because they're useful. So the unbounded view is also very useful in this regard. When we think of caring about all sentient beings and holding the view of aspiration bodhicitta, we normally think of all the people who are on this planet, at most. So the larger view is to think that my connection with others extends beyond the boundaries of this life. And I have no idea what that looks like, except that I can stop for a moment and say, this is what it looks like. Just like where we are, wherever we're sitting, whatever we're feeling, whatever we're thinking, whatever, liking somebody, not liking somebody, that's where it lands. But it's almost always within the context of the realm of people that we know, starting with our family, our brothers and sisters, and our offspring, and extending out to people who have harmed us and so on. The idea that our relationships are not bounded by our birth and our death, but are actually, it's like the dam is broke and the water's going everywhere. So our bodhicitta needs to have that sense of the water is going everywhere, all the time. Those two things then, I think, are very helpful adjuncts to bodhicitta. First, you can hold the unbounded view, like as many beings as I can see and imagine, no matter how big it is, it's still not anywhere even close to the actual bigness. It's more like we've picked up one grain of sand on the beach and put it under a microscope and decided that that's what a beach looks like. Actually, we don't know what a beach looks like by doing that. Okay, I'm done. You're welcome to re-rail.
Seems like you were kind of walking carefully around this idea of joy. A couple, you said joy of a certain kind, and you sounded like you had a little hesitation about that idea. What is joy?
That's a good re-rail. Re-rail. Yeah. Mostly what we're talking about when we talk about joy, we're talking about joy in the positive things that other beings, other people, other beings do. It's a nice antidote again to judgment. Joy is a great antidote to judgment. So we see somebody do something kind, and our general experience of that person is that they're not actually very kind. And so we judge their positive thing that they did as kind of an accident. Like, even really bad people do good things from time to time, like they forget. So so this is an antidote. It's more about our stream of consciousness than someone else's. That when somebody does something positive, even better if it's somebody we've thought just wasn't capable of doing that, that it opens our heart to this place of like, well, could be, could be genuine. So just as a matter of practice, we hold the assumption that it is. Maybe we just don't see all the times that they do something else. But also combine that with the idea that they're kind of on the bumpy road of, spiritual evolution like the rest of us are. Most of the time, driving at night with no lights. So they don't actually see what they're doing. They don't know where they're driving. But maybe they have the aspiration, which is appropriate, but just not all the kind of practice accoutrements and the experience to guide themselves along the path in a functional way. So our first step in helping them is to not judge them, or even better yet, to judge them as inherently kind. And by virtue of the confusion which naturally accompanies us in this life, that natural kindness sometimes doesn't come out so easily. So joy is a little bit, I don't think it should be, it doesn't need to be an odd thing, but in the context of all of the confusion, the wrong understandings, the suffering of samsara and so on, sometimes the idea of, oh, and joy, don't forget that, sounds like, what? Where did that come from? So that's by way of saying, I think it fits into the four immeasurables just like the other three. Okay? So
Yeah.
you look slightly like
Well, I mean,
not convinced.
colloquially, we think of joy as being like bliss, right? Kind of a subjective fullness or
Yeah,
fullness of the heart.
yeah.
But it sounds like the term of art here, joy, is more about equanimity and about embracing our connection.
Yeah. I think without equanimity, the joy itself often becomes a judgment. I know someone, a Western teacher in the Dharma, who manifests this really well, and their practice, they actually have a practice around the joy of things. So if they have somebody who's having a lot of trouble, they immediately find the place, they have a habit of it really, of finding the place where one could understand why they're having that trouble, so that a conversation can be started where the person feels like somebody's being kind to them, at least not judging them, just seeing like, well, it's easy to see why you'd be doing this or having that. But you might try this little thing over here. More?
Joy is definitely one of the four immeasurables where there's quite a variety of approaches, a variety of dimensions. One frame of reference that's sometimes been helpful for me is sometimes it's just referred to as rejoicing. So from the perspective of beginning with a sense of connecting with others from a point of view of warmth, general warmth and concern and kindness, then what arises when you meet people, sometimes things appear to be going well, sometimes things appear to be going not well, and in the when the sense of compassion, you could say, when we see something that we feel that, oh, I understand that is not going well, then how do I relate to that? When you see something, oh, it appears this is going well for somebody, how do I relate to that? There's kind of a rejoicing. Oh, things are going well. May you take advantage of that. Things are not going well. May this work out. So there's some sense of that. So the rejoicing, there's an element of rejoicing in that. There's also just the element that what we bring to a situation when we have a sense of well-being that's not dependent upon circumstances, there's just a sense of, you could say there's a sense of joy in that. There's a sense of freedom and well-being. And we just bring that to whatever situation there is. That's so there's that again depends upon a kind of equanimity. So there are various dimensions to joy as well.
When sitting this morning, with the noise upstairs, I kind of embraced that, like, yes, noise. Samsara, yeah. And that's a kind of joy, as opposed to, oh, fuck, it's noise. It's life.
Yeah.
There's also the sort of the emphasis on when we use the term sympathetic joy. So someone obviously having, happiness about something, if we can appreciate that, we can share in that joy. It doesn't have to be our joy as opposed to your joy. It's actually, there is joy. It's there to be experienced, and we can have that experience through others having their happiness, which is pretty exciting in a way.
And tagging on to that in our culture, because most of us have been steeped in some competitiveness. So when someone gets something good, our mind kind of goes to jealousy or envy. And this kind of sympathetic joy, rejoicing, is a great antidote to that. They got it instead of they got it, they got it, good on them, And then the heart opens instead of closes. And you actually, I've been working with this one for a long time. You can actually start feeling joy in your heart when someone gets something that you really wanted and you didn't get. It's possible. I would have never believed it, but by working, it's just, I'm going to rejoice in this. I'm going to turn from jealousy, and then seeing their joy and seeing if you can connect with it. And it just opens. It's really cool. It works.
Yeah.
Could you please give some specific examples of what you mean by that?
Can't hear.
Susan asked if we could give some specific examples. If you could give some specific example. What do you mean by that?
I can give what I just said, Susan. The first time it happened for me, I had been on a retreat, and the teacher was, Venerable Children was really working this. And shortly after, I went into a restaurant by myself just to get lunch. And a couple came in simultaneously with me, and the waiter waited on them and gave them the last table. And I was not feeling joy initially. I was like, well, here it goes again, discrimination against single women, da 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 da, rah 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 rah. That other person that we have to live with in our heads. And it came to mind to try it. I have to wait here anyway or leave. So I waited, and I just kept sorting through and trying it. And then I watched them, and they sat down at the table, and they were really happy. you know, and I kept watching them, like, look at them, look at it. And then I don't know, something happened. It was like, they're happy. Why wouldn't I be happy that they're happy? Do I not like them? I don't even know them. Okay, that's cool, they're happy. I'm not in a big hurry. I'm okay. And I could start to feel it. Does that help? I mean, it gets that specific. Anytime you
No,
feel.
I appreciate that specificness. What happens for me, for instance, okay, I wonder about being joyful about other people's joy because it's also my interpretation of their joy. So for instance, if I'm reading about people's personal best, I would like to feel joyful for those. And often they're really quite amazing things these people are doing. But then what I can also fall into is the whole thing that, well, wait a minute, our practice is about this is impermanent and this isn't supposed to bring bad, and blah, blah, blah. And so it's like, because I understand it on that really personal level, in terms of you just see something doing something that you feel, you can see their joy and you can go, okay, I can appreciate that. And you can see also your own, as you say, you saw your own initial reaction to that. I guess I'm just wondering more in the broader sense.
Well, we always need to hold relative and ultimate and maybe not mix them up so much, even though they're like this. So in the ultimate, sure, it's impermanent, and maybe some moment they'll feel unjoy because they got hooked on their joy. But I'm not in charge of that. I'm not in charge of that on a relative level. We get to enjoy things. That's all I can say about that. Just allow it.
I wanted to, I wanted to confess, like, joy is definitely the most, that's the one where I feel like I don't really know what it is, and I feel like it's like my weak point. Like I'm much better, I can do compassion, and on good days I can do love, and equanimity just seems a little mysterious, so I'm willing to give that one a break. Joy, I know, I spent 7 years as a depressed person, and the way that I characterized that time was joyless. And so I really wasn't sure what to do with the practice of immeasurable joy when it seemed like what I had was like zero, like it was measureless in the other measure. And so one of the things that I learned, though, in sort of working my way out of that, is that I did have joy, but I didn't actually realize that's what that was. And so when I could speak, I don't intentionally try to make people laugh, but when they do, I actually experience that back as joyful. And when I look out there and people smile back at me, I did actually experience, and so I had to acknowledge, okay, there is some joy there. And I think, recently I went to my teacher because I asked my wife, like, what is my greatest flaw? And she said, you're too critical. And I said, you're right. I will be less critical. I will and so I'm like, I went to my teacher and I said, my goal is to appreciate my wife more and my life more. And he said, really? And I was like, I'm going to notice things, and I'm going to appreciate them, and things will be better, and she'll be happier, and we'll, be happier as a couple. And he just kind of smiled and then said essentially the same thing that he says to me every single time I come to him with one of these harebrained schemes. But actually, this one was counterintuitive. What he said was, I think in order to appreciate things, you actually maybe need to start with, do you actually enjoy your life? And I said, well, sometimes. It's okay. Some good things and some irritating things. And he said, you know, perhaps instead of trying to fix your greatest flaw, maybe a better way to come at it would be, why don't you just try to simply appreciate the things, you know, try to enjoy yourself. And he said, maybe if you're in this sort of joyful state, maybe you'll more naturally appreciate things and send that out into the world instead of, well, what my normal state is to judge a lot of stuff and to send that out into the world. So it was not the advice I was expecting, and it's hard. And so I asked him, so how do you, okay, so what is that, you know, because how do you do that? And he said, well, you could just start with appreciating right now. And he's like, oh, not this again. Are you kidding me? Really? He's like, you know, and he sort of walked through. He's like, you know, you have two eyes that work. You're relatively comfortable right now. You're at peace. You know, can you appreciate that? So this is like Confessions of a Joyless practitioner. But I think the other side of it is joy is not complicated. It's when you experience it, you experience it. And the people who seem to be really good at it seem to be really joyful, and it's infectious, and they send that out into the world. And you know people who are like really good, you know, like you can't wait to tell them that something happened because you know they'll like blow it up into a big deal. You know, and you're like, and it's magnified. And so I think that the trick is that you can get, you know, you can kind of get. There's some traps with joy, but I also think it's simple. If you share your joy with others, then it increases. And if you can share other people's joy, then that increases. And so that's all I have to say about that.
I enjoyed that.
I did too, thank you.
It's interesting that we seem to need permission to enjoy things in this way. It's easy for us to take on compassion as, okay, I'll grit my teeth and deal with these bad situations. Okay, I can, all right. Okay. But to actually have this, no, okay, find this well-being, tap into it, share this. Really? That's important. If that's permitted. Feeling good is permitted in this section. I've generally, I've only had a few episodes in my life that were that experience of immeasureless joy, the 0 point. But I've more had the opposite, and I felt. And it has its downsides, just kind of feeling happy-go-lucky a lot of the time. It's like, so I didn't get the paper done on time. And I don't think there is this is not like some kind of moral victory. I mean, we were all born with different kinds of situations and things unfold in different ways. My mother actually said, you were different when you were a kid. I would come in the morning, instead of fussing, you'd be standing up quietly, holding on to the crib and just smiling. So there is I've felt blessed by that, and I've found something in that the experience that was kind of hard for you to come by is something that was more natural for me. But it's not, it's still a very powerful thing. And finding the kind of sense of well-being that's actually not fundamentally dependent on getting something, being entertained by something, avoiding something. This is something that's a very powerful. It's very powerful actually, and very, very positive. So being able to go there, being able to cultivate this, and cultivate this with this sense of whatever arises, may I bring this sense of well-being into the situation. That's in there, it's equanimity. So it's yeah, joy we don't talk about much. We're better at, oh, it's all broke, let's try to fix it, or learn to what it means to not try to fix it and deal with it and all the other kinds of things. But the potential, the basic potential for well-being that's not dependent upon circumstances, entertainment, or the rest is very deep. It's very deep.
I'd like to ask a question.
Can you speak up?
I'd like to ask a question.
Mm.
If the experience you have when you're in this place of meditation, when you're calm and there's no thoughts, is a boundless mind.
Boundless?
If that's the boundless mind that you're talking about, then surely that's a quality that is an experience that can arise in all places. So it seems like having the measurables in place are almost placing a concept in the way of that boundless, calm, awakened mind. So then they become a distraction, the measurables become a distraction in a way. That's my question.
That was a statement. But we can take it as a question. That's okay. I think you're right. Of course. You could say that, however, about every instruction for every meditation practice. That you hear it, it's explained, it's conceptual. So on the extreme side, you could say, that's another conceptual instruction. I won't do that thing because it's not going to be useful. Basically, from using your words, I think you would say, I can't seem to get out of the way, so I won't do anything. And we have to understand that there's a value to the conceptual. And the value is increased by virtue of understanding the obstacles and the problems relating with understanding things conceptually. And then, and this is the big problem really, and then we move into this place of having the experience that we have really deeply experientially understood it, when actually we've very clearly understood the conceptual explanation. We all fall into that. And at some point we get tired with that, so then best case we move on to actually engaging in the practice from an experiential side, which is where all of it has to go. I think you're right. You know, you're right. The question then is, what are you going to do now?
Meditate.
Well, the basic meditation of calm abiding or shamatha is really meant to be a completely non-conceptual experience. You sit down, you relax, you let your mind settle, and then whatever happens, you remain aware of it. Don't need to apply an antidote or anything, but those instructions sound very nice, but then occasionally we have that experience, and most of the time we have the experience of being distracted. But even the distraction doesn't have to be a problem. The distraction, normally we say, is a problem. You need to keep your awareness on the object of your meditation. But the distraction itself, as a kind of higher level, can actually be the object of your meditation. At that point, then, you don't need to apply an antidote, because you'd be applying an antidote to the actual authentic meditation. So these things, what we hear on any given day or from any given person at any time, may be very useful, but it's also helpful to understand that whatever is useful today may not be useful in a week, a year, a decade, or something that seemed totally useless may actually become useful at a future time. Path is not one thing. What do you think?
I think this, the value of things changing all the time, that makes a lot of sense to me. The value of that experience.
Your view and your attitude of it are important, of course, because we already know things are going to change,
Yeah.
whether you pay attention to it or not. Thanks.
Sometimes when we use the word distraction, the way you used the word distraction just now, in a certain way, I tend to think of there is distractedness.
Yeah.
And so what we label as a distraction, in one frame of reference, well, my mind was on the breath, and then my mind was on lunch. And the attention, the thought of lunch was the distraction, but actually losing track of losing the thread of awareness was where distractedness arose. And when you later said, then the distraction could be actually the subject of meditation, that means actually distractedness did not arise. There was never any distractedness, but what arose, whether there was movement in the mind, whether there was stability, that was not, that it doesn't matter if you don't have the distractedness arise. I think that, for me, that helps clarify this.
Yeah. Okay, right.
And so the very first thing that you said about the mind free of thoughts, the boundless mind being free of thoughts, sometimes it could be free of thoughts. Sometimes there can be movement in the mind. But in that case, whether there is distractedness or not is the question. But for a very long time, when there's movement in the mind, we're seduced by the movement, and we're lost in it, and we're lost in our confusion about that. So, for a long time, just the notion, oh, there's this, it's a distraction, that's fine. But in the longer run, this notion of cultivating deeper sense of non-distractedness is a deeper thing.
So for those of you who are, I'll just finish this quick. For those of you who are interested, we meet again this evening. Same program pretty much as today. So Marcy, so you're the last.
On the last question.
Maybe the last word too.
You were referring to the distractions that would come up in our shamatha as being very much had this sound of randomness and out of controlness to it. And I'm wondering if, I mean, I guess when you said that, I was thinking about how if everything that arises in my mind is karma, is that true? And is what I do today, I mean, there is some element of not control, but as far as what I do today and the way that I think my mind, the things that I do with my body, speech, and mind are gonna influence what those distractions are, correct? Like, there is some, it's not totally random or out of control in that sense, right?
Who said it was random?
Well, I don't know. That was not random, but it was just the way you were describing the way we can't control what comes up in our mind, and I get that. But I guess I'm wondering if there's some like that was just my thought anyway, and I was wondering if that's correct.
And what's the that exactly?
Well, that it's. I mean, it's not that hopeless in the sense that you can shape what comes up in your mind over time by what you do with your body, speech, and mind today, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean that's really the basis of the Buddhist ethical system, is that what you do will influence things later, maybe almost instantly, but also later. So. And it includes what you think, what you say, what you do with your body. It's like all of those things add up. And I think sometimes we put way too much effort in trying to understand it as karma, when we actually had a step ladder in front of us that we could have just stepped up and, understood what was in the cupboard instead of having to go through these machinations around the karmic side. Karma is a complicated thing. But the foundation of it looks pretty simple. For most of us will understand that my actions bear results. What we may not understand and may not even believe is that they bear results far more predictably, in the sense that it's predictable that there will be a result. You can't know exactly what it is or when it will occur. And so it's difficult to sometimes embrace the idea that most of the karma that ripens in this life was seeded or planted in previous lives. But it's another one of those things that's a very useful view to hold. Rather than wonder whether it's the truth or exactly how that works, if you just hold the view that it works like that, it changes a lot of what we just do naturally without having to memorize the lists of what you should do and shouldn't do. You can kind of get close to the sense of what is a good thing, what is not a good thing, what is helpful for myself and others, what is not helpful for myself and others. And that understanding comes right out of the meditation as part of our life. So I think there can be a feeling that these things are random, in the same way that we might say that weather patterns are so big that at any given time, whether or not you will feel a blast of cool or warm air on your face feels totally random. But we also understand that that's just because we're not sophisticated enough to know all the causes and conditions, all the things that come to bear there, and the things that happen to us in this life, including our distractions or the things that arise that we didn't think about, can feel that way, that it feels random, because we cannot connect all the dots to all of the things that have happened, not just that we have done, but what we have done in our continuously changing interconnectedness with all other beings. I think that's why I think it's helpful to embrace something like the Four Immeasurables, or whatever it is that works for someone, and to just focus on that and understand that the outcome cannot be predicted in time or exactly what it will be. But if I continuously hold the attitude that my life is for the benefit of others, that will bear a certain result in this life and beyond that. I think it's an easier and more, I'm going to say it, a more joyful approach. You're also not looking for the good thing that comes from the good thing we did. Like, I did that, now I should get something. We already know, we're all old enough to know, that is a losing proposition. So, okay. Dedication is
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Please stay and help clean. Thank you.
The form visuals are interesting. I think it would be worth doing a teaching where you start with each one.
Yeah.
And then you say, actually, this one's all you need because based on this, others will naturally rise.
Yeah.
And then to follow the threads back and forth.
Yeah.
And just thinking about joy. It's like, really, this deep sense of well-being doesn't depend on circumstances. Equanimity is just, it's right there. And the basic one, I'm okay, it's easy to,